If you can't handle Black excellence, scroll, because that's all I have for you.
Good morning, bad news! Gas stoves are slowly killing you and your family, and may even be banned in some states. Last year, a study came out showing that 1 in 10 cases of childhood asthma is attributable to gas stoves, which is the same level of impact as secondhand smoking. Gas-powered appliances dump methane gas, nitrogen dioxide, and carbon monoxide into your home. And while we all love cooking indoors with gas, the science clearly shows it's dangerous, outdated, and inefficient. So instead of having a nuanced discussion about regulating something popular but harmful like leaded gasoline and lawn darts, we're instead seeing bought and paid for political activists like conservative politician Joe Manchin flooding social media with pro-gas stove culture war nonsense. And it's for the simple reason that the oil and gas lobby in the United States is by far one of the largest sources of legalized bribery. And it works! Instead of pushing for a national conversation about the dangers of gas stoves and child health, Democrats and regulators panicked about this made-up and paid-for backlash and immediately announced that there would be no federal ban and absolutely no changes to existing federal laws around this consumer product that we know to be harmful. So we just want to take this moment to congratulate greedy corporate propagandists for winning yet another round against spineless and ineffectual federal agencies who would rather cower in fear than prevent child asthma.
Genuinely do not understand. Also, as a non-black person, I have fucking questions.
I find your question to be disingenuous, and I feel like you know it's disingenuous. Because if you ever listen to people who were marginalized within black spaces, you would realize this is not surprising. People who are women, queer, disabled, and also black will tell you this is not a surprise. Because most people confuse equality with power, and will seek out the same power using the same methods as white supremacy. But here's why your question is disingenuous. Because people were protesting police. Police, period. And most of us do not have a problem accepting the duality of the fact that black cops are still cops, and that it is telling that they took all this preemptive action before even releasing the tape. And that police unions and fellow police officers are radio silent. We know what the game is.
This is a political cartoon from the 60s showing Martin Luther King saying, "I plan to lead another non-violent march tomorrow, standing amidst the rubble of a riot, with a white reporter looking on in horror." The week Martin Luther King died, 75% of America disapproved of his actions and thought that this is all that he did. Show this to anyone you know that denigrates Black Lives Matter by saying all they do is riot and burn cities, and remind them that they would have said the same thing about Martin Luther King back in the day.
I think that we're missing the point of the bimbo movement. For a lot of people are missing the point. I think that some people see the bimbo movement as a way of women dissociating from oppression, right? Especially a certain demographic, a certain racial demographic of women. But not all bimbos are white. And also, a lot of bimbos are talking about radical leftism and about the fact that intelligence should not be the only thing that matters within a person. And also that you can look pretty and look gorgeous and look highly sexual and be like a over-the-top version of what femininity is supposed to be and still be extremely smart and want better for the world and still think politically. It's not about dissociating.
Good girl in a straw hat with her arms out in a cornfield. That is a scarecrow.
It's Black History Month, so I'm bringing back my series, Black Hair is Black History. So let's talk about the history of dreadlocks. The earliest piece of written evidence dates back to 1500 BC in ancient holy Hindu texts. The first archaeological evidence was found in mummified remains in ancient Egypt. Matted locks had a strong cultural and social symbol since ancient times. In many cultures, locked hair was symbolic of a connection to the spiritual realm. Locks were also associated with strength and sometimes only worn by warriors and chiefs. Locked hair has been present in mostly all continents since the beginning of time. So although it can't be claimed by a particular group, the widespread popularization in the West we see today is credited to the Rastafari movement, which began in the 30s. Rastafarians consider locks a sign of their African identity and their rejection to the West. They also believe in a deeper spiritual connection to the hairstyle. The word dreadlocks was actually created by a group of young Rastas, and dread refers to a deep reverence and fear of God. Artists like Bob Marley helped spread the Rastafari message, and he helped make reggae music a global phenomenon. Wearing dreadlocks was one of the boldest rebellious acts for slaves, and the punishments were often brutal. Even today, Black people are being discriminated against in work, school, and in sports for having dreadlocks. Dreadlocks are still a big part of Black identity, and it's important to realize the sacred and historic significance of them.
The divine feminine, but it's really just a guide on how to subscribe to patriarchal norms.
But I didn't and still don't like making a cult of women's knowledge, preening ourselves on knowing things men don't know, women's deep irrational wisdom, women's instinctive knowledge of nature, and so on. All that, all too often, merely reinforces the masculinist idea of women as primitive and inferior. Women's knowledge is elementary, primitive, always down below at the dark roots, while men get to cultivate and own the flowers and crops that come up into the light. But why should women keep talking baby talk while men get to grow up? Why should women feel blindly when men get to think? That video put into words perfectly something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. I can critique rationalism with the best of them, but this divine feminism, nature is a woman thing is equally dangerous. The whole point is that womanhood is not an objective truth. It's not a monolithic experience.
I will never get over self-aware white people. And when I say self-aware white people, it's them who have come to the realization about, you know, their unnecessary behavior towards like ethnic cultures and the co-opting of them. I have a colleague. Let's name her Susie. Susie and I are close. I love her. She's the prettiest girl with the prettiest blue eyes and the prettiest long blonde hair. Now, one day I came into work with braids. Susie had initially met me when we started work where I had my hair like this, straightened. Susie was baffled by my braids because Susie grew up in a predominantly white area. She obviously respectfully asked me questions about it, how long it took, does it hurt, and how long it remains, all the typical questions, and I was so glad to answer them. And then Susie, out of nowhere, says one thing. I don't get why white girls want to wear braids. It's not even for their hair anyways. And it's always the blonde girls that seem to try so hard to force issues. I nearly fell off my seat at work that day. Love Susie.
How much is this gonna cost? Oh no, what? That number is non-negotiable. Sorry, I just thought because of the way you slid over the paper with a very intimidating number on it. Yeah, but no. This number is a lot. Yes, it is. So I must get a lot of coverage in return. You do not. I don't know if I want this then. You need it. Why? You might get hit by a bus. Promise? What? Nothing. Are you saying you will help if I have like major medical bills? Yes, some once you hit your deductible, which is high.
The reality is that if your response to abolish the police is to ask what's going to replace them, you don't understand how ineffective police actually are at any of the positive roles of their job. Police or the presence of police does not stop crime. They don't solve crime. Only 2% of major crimes actually get solved by police. And that's not even counting all the false convictions. Police don't keep kids, adults, teens, or the elderly safe. They can't address mental health crisis. They can't address domestic violence. They all suck at de-escalation. So whatever it is you think police are doing that is so important that we can't abolish them, I promise you they're not doing it. It's literally the law that the police are not here to protect you. They have one job, and that is protect capital. If you expect them to do any more than that, they will always sorely disappoint you.
Howdy, Nat Turner freedom fighters. Today we are honoring European American activist and men's rights supporter John Fitzgerald Kennedy. JFK, as he was known among friends in the outer city, showed us that European Americans can do good for this country. To honor his legacy, we will play a snippet of a European American spiritual, title unknown.
Danny boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the...
Wow, how moving. Right, let's move on.
Stitch this video with a Black history fact that not a lot of people know.
We all know the chill that the song Strange Fruit will send down your spine, especially if you are Black in America. We all know that Nina Simone sings the song, but the majority of us know that Billie Holiday is the original singer of that song. But I'm going to take it a step further. Strange Fruit was originally a poem written by a white Jewish American teacher from Bronx, New York, named Lewis Allen, which was his pseudonym for Abel Meeropol. The poem was originally called Bitter Fruit. Many other people did pick up the song to sing it, but originally Billie Holiday is who made it popular. Now, do remember that when Billie Holiday sang it, the FBI basically ruined her career after they threatened her to stop singing it, and she didn't. But when Mr. Meeropol was asked why did he write Strange Fruit, he said, and I quote, "I wrote Strange Fruit because I hate lynching, and I hate injustice, and I hate the people who perpetuate it." This was said in 1971.
Peitinho primeiro.
Something people need to understand about me is I'm autistic, and for a lot of autistic people, we have a strong sense of justice, and that's why a lot of our special interest, or very common special interest, is activism. Along with that, when I was 5 years old, my best friend's dad told me that I remind him of Martin Luther King, and he thinks I'm going to be this generation's Martin Luther King. It was a bit of an ego boost, gave me a little bit of a complex, but that's besides the point. I will never be Martin Luther King because I'm Betsy Watson. I'm going to make a name for myself, and I'm going to represent what I want to represent. Not to mention the fact that we can never be the same, like different generation, different issues. But what I will say is, as I've gotten older and critically thought on this, I thought about the fact that Martin Luther King was hated by a majority of people. You know, he ended up being in the end of his life because he represented something good, and he went against the ruling class. He went against the class of privilege, of power, and that's exactly what I'm doing. So when people are giving me mass amounts of hate and people are saying, nobody agrees with you, everyone hates you, da-da-da, it's only encouraging me because no one ever agrees with activists, especially Blacktivists. You know what I'm saying? And in the end, I could have ended up being it, but it's all worth it for the liberation of my peoples. Get me?
Did you know that there are Chinese Jewish people in China and they're called Kaifang Jews? Let me explain. Hi, my name is Raven. I'm Black and Jewish and I educate on diversity in the Jewish community. Those scholars don't agree on exactly when they started to arrive, either during the Tang or Song dynasty. Jewish folks from India or Persia, present-day Iran, began to trade along the Silk Road. Many of these people settled in Kaifang, a city in China's Henan province. Kaifang's first synagogue was built in this year, but was destroyed by a flood by this year. Over the next 400 years, there was a fire, another flood, and then one more flood in the 1860s that wiped out Kaifang's last synagogue. It was also around this time that the community's last religious leader passed away. Building and rebuilding a synagogue so close to the Yellow River maybe wasn't the best idea. But hindsight's 2020, right? Kaifang Jews prayed in both Hebrew and Chinese, which is so cool. And at their most populous, the Kaifang community had about 5,000 members. Due to intermarriage with Han Chinese people, folks from different religious backgrounds, and a whole host of assimilation tactics, the Jewish Kaifang community gradually declined. Today, there are about 1,000 Kaifang Jewish people in China. Their Jewish heritage deserves to be recognized, celebrated, and validated. L'chaim.
Black History Month is a scam. Black people, people of African descent, have literally been on this country's soil just as long as people of European descent. Literally just as long. But think about the way that you can only be called an American if you are of European descent. Literally everyone else can never be called just an American. You will only ever be an Indian American, an Asian American, or an African American. This naming convention is not founded on anything valid, but it does serve a particular purpose. This is how name games work. Even though people of African descent have been on this soil just as long as people of European descent, our history is limited to 1 month out of the year. Because we are not considered Americans, our history cannot be considered general American history. The way that we name things matter. And anytime that we observe that we have named something with no logical basis, we should be alarmed. And we should be asking ourselves, why is that the case?
It wouldn't be right to kick off Black History Month without letting everyone know that February 13th is actually a Black holiday. This is your girl, Miss Tiana Nicole, with Black Facts You Didn't Know. February 13th is actually Black Love Day. In 1993, Io Hindi received a calling to create a day celebrating Black love. Black Love Day not only embraces Black culture, but observes 5 principles or tenets. The first being love for the creator, love for self, love for the Black family, love for community, and for the Black race as a whole. Now, if you're ignorant, you might think this is just some convenient alternative to Valentine's Day, but a day for Black people to reconcile, to rebuild, to restore, to recover, and for us to remember just how powerful Black love is all around. And for the white people that want to participate so badly, you can also reflect on how you can be better towards the Black community. So y'all can be hyped for Valentine's Day. I'm looking forward to Black Love Day.
Sometimes I wish I could lend you my ears, lend you my thoughts, and lend you my tears.
Are you a colonizer? That was the essential question I asked myself last year when I realized that I was carrying way too much stress about whether or not others understood the social and human rights issues that are plaguing humanity today. I found myself in tears, for the last time might I add, after arguing with some fool about their ignorance. And here my language is very intentional. Ignorance means lack of knowledge or unconsciousness, and fool, well, that's a person who acts without wisdom. After that encounter, I asked myself, do you believe that you should have control over this person and their politics, even though they don't want you to? And the answer, well, it was hell no. Unlike in the movies, the reality is, across the world and throughout human history, most social movements, including the often cited civil rights movements of the 60s, were not supported by the majority. For example, it's helpful to remember that just 2 years before Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, 63% of Americans viewed him unfavorably. That was where the majority stood, and still change was made. It was made by the collective and conscious power of the many who were still a minority of the population. In truth, change requires some degree of friction, resistance, discomfort, or agitation, and if someone decides that despite the offer of information or enlightenment, that their role in human history is to be a hearty example of why we need change, then who am I to stop them? Their mind is their own. My job is not to colonize them or their mind, or anyone else's for that matter, because that's largely why we're here in the first place. My job is to be more deeply aligned with the values and truths that exemplify the change I wish to see in the world. And therefore, an extension of that job is to be crystal clear about what side those around me are standing on. So now, when I share my thoughts, wisdoms, or learnings, I'm genuinely only offering them, and I take no personal responsibility over whether others will actually pick up what I'm putting down.
If your coping skills are deemed by society to be bad or negative, then please watch this video. Maybe you smoke a lot because life feels really overwhelming. Maybe you use other substances to cope. Maybe you are chronically on your phone and scrolling through TikTok to the point where your brain is just numb and doesn't have any thoughts in them. The way that society tells us to deal with our coping mechanisms is to remove them completely. But from a harm reductionist approach, we can see that reducing the harm to ourselves and to others comes from a place of compassion and understanding. You have a tendency to be on your phone all day? Take breaks in between and incorporate going outside in some sunlight. You have a tendency to use substances to the point where you no longer feel present in your relationships? Communicate with your loved ones. Try to take breaks in between. Eat foods and drink things that are nourishing to your body. See harm reduction as a way to add things to your life instead of just taking away.
Black people deserve to get to be normal. That's a thought that's been circulating my head over the last 24 hours. I hadn't been fully caught up on everything surrounding the murder of Tyre Nichols. I'd seen some tweets but kind of glanced at them, hadn't fully dove into the situation. And so I spent some time last night just reading articles, kind of breaking down the whole situation and the succession of events and everything that we know. And by the time I made it to the end of the articles, like many of you, I started to cry. And I haven't watched the tape. I'm not going to watch the tape. I can't handle the tape. But I did see another tape of him skateboarding. And I thought about when I was a kid and skating, and I wish that I could have been as good of a skater as he was. I saw that he had recently moved to Memphis and that he had taken a job at FedEx. And it made me think about my nigga P and how he used to work at FedEx a couple years back and how much he hated that ish. I saw that he was a dad. I saw that he had a great smile, and I saw that he was just a year younger than me, and that really made me feel like, damn, why is it gotta be like this? Why is it gotta be like this still? And I guess at the end of those articles, that brother really started coming to life for me through these words and these visuals. And I kept thinking about how can I help the people in this time as a person who's leveraged their artistry to empower marginalized and oppressed peoples and to challenge perspectives. And the thought that just continued to circulate my head was that, damn, he was just an ordinary brother. He was just an ordinary dude living an ordinary life, and he deserved to be able to. And it really made me think about how we just deserve to be able to live ordinary lives. We deserve to live ordinary lives without the fear of being reduced to hashtags, especially by systems of oppression that have been corrupt and oppressive since their inception, since our ancestors were struggling for their own freedom years and years ago. And Tyre deserved to be a normal dude, not a hashtag. And so that's your revolutionary thought for today. Black people deserve to get to be normal.
You really are an idiot, aren't you? Like super white hot, blazingly stupid.
Why does Black Pride come off as but White Pride comes off as
just a good old boy, never meaning no harm.
This is Dara Star Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. Black and white pride come off very differently in the US because of the way that race and culture developed here. See, the concept of race is a colonial construct. It's a theory based on pseudoscience that was developed to create a hierarchy to group people by skin color. The theory of race falsely claims that people who come from sub-Saharan Africa are at the bottom of the pyramid in terms of intelligence, desirability, and overall worth. It made them subhuman. The lighter your skin was, the more valuable and entitled you were. It's all made up, since the concept of race is not attached to any legitimate biological or scientific truths. Race is not real. but racism is. Black people were brought to the United States in chains from countries all over the continent of Africa, like Nigeria, Ghana, the Congo, and the Ivory Coast, with their own unique ethnicities, traditions, and cultures. But when they hit U.S. shores, they were simply called Negroes, and their cultures were stripped away. The people with white skin who migrated from countries like England, Germany, the Netherlands, and Spain, Caucasians, brought their cultures with them. So colonial powers cut Black people off from the rest of American society. They weren't allowed to attend school, they had to develop their own worship services and their own social framework, but they were also cut off from their cultures of origin. They weren't allowed to practice their religions or speak their languages of origin, and their social customs from their homeland started to fade over time. So what do you think they did? They began to develop a distinct culture of their own. This is what's known as Black American culture. Blackness in the U.S. is not just a color or a racial grouping based on pseudoscience. It's a culture. It represents triumph in the face of extreme adversity. It's something to take pride in. If you're a white person in the U.S., you can probably trace your ancestry back through many generations. Descendants of enslaved people usually can't do this. Records generally were not kept of marriages of enslaved people if they were allowed to marry at all. It was illegal for them to learn how to read and write, so they weren't able to pass down any of their own family histories or customs. Southern pride can often be a stand-in for toxic masculinity, racism, and the fear of outsiders. So much of it was born of the need to marginalize, oppress, and harm non-white people that it can carry an earned stigma in the minds of so many people. And so much of mainstream American culture has descended into gross consumerism. Many Americans would be hard-pressed to define what their culture is outside of Walmart, Applebee's, and megachurches. In short, Black pride developed out of the need to overcome horrific circumstances. Black culture was born out of triumph in the face of isolation, hardship, and persecution. It's pride that's tied to achievement. Things like Irish pride, Italian pride, Scottish pride, they're attached to culture and should be celebrated as well. But white pride? Well, that's simply a celebration that you were born at the top of a phony racial pyramid, and it carries all of the ugly baggage that comes with that complicated history in the United States. To learn more about this topic, visit the reading list at the link in my bio.
I love getting questions like these because it's things that I actually didn't know about vitiligo either until I had it myself. So there are actually different types of vitiligo, and the one that you're asking about where it covers your entire body, or at least 85 to 95% of your body, is called vitiligo universalis, which also start off as spots, but then it eventually covers up a majority part of your skin. The kind of vitiligo that I have is called vitiligo vulgaris, which doesn't spread throughout the whole body, and it mostly appears on places where your body has joints. So I have it on my armpits, my hands, my elbows, my knees, my feet, anywhere where I have like inflammation points. Another characteristic of vitiligo vulgaris, which is actually something I love about my vitiligo, is that it presents itself very symmetrically, which I talked about in my last video. You can see that the shapes are pretty much the same on each side. And what's crazy is when vitiligo is in an active stage, which is not all the time, sometimes it goes dormant, but when it's active, if I get a scratch, let's say my cat scratches me on my arm right here, I'll get a vitiligo spot here, and the same spot will appear in the same shape and place on the other arm. It's wild.
This comment reads, can you do one on YWNBAW, or have you already? I haven't. Let's talk about it. This is a transphobic dog whistle that, it's an initialism that stands for You Will Never Be a Woman, and is frequently left by TERFs on trans women's videos, who, let us state for the record, are women.
Here's why Morgan Freeman was wrong.
Black History Month you find ridiculous. Why?
Every Black History Month, conservatives amplify this Morgan Freeman interview.
I don't want a Black History Month.
Let's debunk the arguments made here point by point.
You're going to relegate my history to a month? Oh, come on.
The first problem is that he conflates celebration and relegation. Christians don't call Christmas ridiculous because it relegates Jesus to December. I promise you we can celebrate Black history anytime. In fact, I do that right here, so follow your boy.
Which month is White History Month? No, well, come on, tell me.
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh,
March is Irish American Heritage Month, and the interviewer is wrong. May is Jewish American Heritage Month. German Americans and Polish Americans celebrate their heritage in October.
I don't want a Black History Month.
That's good for you. Don't celebrate it. But the Pew Research Center found that more than half of Black Americans polled said that being Black was extremely important to their identity. Black History Month is popular in the Black community. So Mr. Freeman's point is a minority opinion.
Black history is American history.
True, we agree right there.
How are we going to get rid of racism and
Stop talking about it.
Wrong, we disagree. This argument really doesn't make any sense. It's like saying stop talking about cancer and it will magically disappear. The reality is that we didn't talk about racism for hundreds of years, and yet Black people were still in chains.
I'm going to stop calling you a white man.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you to stop calling me a black man.
This is such a terrible take, I have a hard time knowing where to start. If we stopped calling every lighter-skinned person white and every darker-skinned person black right now today, the lighter-skinned people would still possess 10 times the wealth of darker-skinned people. The lighter-skinned people would still live in a country that never made them property because of the color of their skin. To stop talking about race is a shallow solution to a deep problem. Morgan Freeman is an amazing actor, he is a legend, but maybe not the most thoughtful social scientist.
Absolutely no hate to this person, but I can't believe it's 2023 and there are still people that think the Middle Eastern equals Arab. Not all Arabs are Middle Eastern, and not all Middle Easterns are Arab. There are lots of other ethnic groups in the Middle East, such as Persians, Kurds, Baluchis, Assyrians, and many, many more. Also, the Middle East is not a country, it's not a continent, it's just a region. It's colonial and oriental, which is why the preferred term is SWANA. SWANA is a decolonial term that stands for Southwest Asia and North Africa. It's more inclusive, and unlike the Middle East, it's not a term that the West made up for their own benefit. And lastly, not all Middle Easterns are Muslim, and not all Muslims are Middle Eastern.
Do the names Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, or Bo Diddley ring a bell to you? Because without them, rock and roll wouldn't exist as we know it. Yep, while no one person can say that they invented the rock and roll phenomenon, this music genre was undeniably influenced by African Americans. As rock and roll pioneer Little Richard said, the blues had an illegitimate baby and we named it rock and roll. So let's get into it, shall we? Rock and roll was directly influenced by the blues, a style of music that originated on plantations in the Deep South in the early 19th century. Other genres like bluegrass, gospel, and jazz also helped spawn it. You see, in the late 1940s, many Southern African Americans moved to northern cities with the hopes of living safer, better lives and escaping harsh Jim Crow laws. They brought with them the sounds of the blues, and in the big, bustling cities of Chicago, Detroit, New York City, and Los Angeles, the blues evolved into a more up-tempo sound called rhythm and blues, or R&B. In the early 1950s, this new, youthful sound exploded onto the American music scene. At the time, nobody was playing it but black people like Fats Domino, Little Richard, and Chuck Berry. But then, a shift happened. Music executives realized that not everyone buying R&B records or listening to R&B songs were black. You see, white suburban teenagers love this type of sound. You can even say that they were instrumental to the rise of rock and roll in the US, because once music execs realized how popular R&B was, they saw an opportunity to capitalize off of it. Cleveland radio DJ Alan Freed coined the term rock and roll in 1951 to describe this new type of music that white teenagers were listening to, and this was a key move in repositioning the product. But there was just one problem. All of the rock and roll performers were black, and what with the rise of television, coupled with the racism of the era, this was a problem. It's even said that record producer Sam Phillips once mentioned, if I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro field, I could make $1 billion. And thus, the stage was set for Elvis Presley, but more on that in part 2.
I'm talking home, nobody knocks. I'm talking opposite of soft. I'm talking wild, wild thoughts.
Here's 4 of my favorite nonfiction books that are incredibly accessible. They're written in very understandable language, but are also so deep and so thoughtful. For a critical analysis of disability and how it's paired with society, I think you need to check out Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary, Resilient, Disabled Body, which is a beautiful story about being disabled, but also gives you so much to think about how disability pairs with everything. A book that teeters on self-help but does it incredibly well is Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. This talks about really dark points in your life and how to process them, what to let go of and what to hold on to. A book with really simple language that is also one of the most beautiful books that I have ever read is Heavy. This book talks about racism, classism, body image issues, and a ton of other things that I think are incredibly important, but this does it so well. Hood Feminism is about intersectional feminism and is completely understandable to any audience. It's one of the most beautiful books I've read.
Oh my god, are we still doing the chocolate stuff? Liberals are coming to take your gas stove, except they aren't and they probably should. Someone from the commission that regulates consumer products, one of the most important things the government does, recently spoke about how dangerous gas stoves are. And having a gas stove in your house is dangerous. Recent studies have shown that they can cause many bad health effects, including increased asthma risk and cancer risk. And that's it. There have been no plans to take them away. So of course, conservatives have lost their minds and are talking about how you can take my gas stove from my cold dead hands. And also, I've been burning my gas stove all day to own the libs. And politicizing public health like this is extremely dangerous. We already saw with COVID how it led to hundreds of thousands of deaths. Just imagine how conservatives would react if science found out today about the bad health effects of asbestos or lead. For an ideology that is obsessed with protecting kids, they sure love hurting kids. Okay, whatever.
Welcome to the first installment of the Blackity Black Pop Quiz, where your answers to the following questions will tell me if I could discuss police brutality with you and not end up wanting to punch you in the face. Let's get started. Question 1. What is the most popular song from this music group? Number 2. Emancipation Proclamation aside, was Lincoln actually a good president? Number 3. In the movie Soul Food, which relative's husband did Cousin Faith fuck? Friends are living single. Quickly. Number 5. How is the woman at the top related to both Beyonce and Luther Vandross? Next question. Without Google, can you give me a quote from this man that has absolutely nothing to do with love or having a dream? Number 7. Can you name all of these women and do you consider at least 2 of them to be your auntie? Number 8. Is there a such thing as black on black crime? This one counts for 2 questions. So number 9 and 10. Number 9, can you name all of these hairstyles? And number 10, what is this one right here used for?
She gonna stink sometimes.
It is. And the fact that she's experiencing ridicule over that video and from adults is terrifying. So I'm just here to reiterate. If you have a twat, a coochie, a vagina, a portal, a putoisi, there's a high chance that at some point during your life, that motherfucker gonna have an odor. An odor that can be caused by a variety of things that have absolutely nothing to do with poor hygiene, including semen, sweat, your diet, your period, getting pregnant, birth control, cervical cancer, STIs or STDs, certain soaps. After 25, I had to take so many things out of my diet, bitch, even cup of noodles. And even if the odor is due to poor hygiene, that is not something we should be shaming people for. We should be educating them. And I know that somebody may do the same thing to me that y'all were trying to do to Kaylin. Saying that she must be a stinking ass bitch for wanting to actually educate in a funny and engaging way. And to those people I say, you got me. I'm smelly, stank, funky, fermented. My jaws have a panic attack every time I go to pull them up.
Great question. So capitalism is a struggle between the workers and the capital owners. We live under liberal capitalism, which basically means that money is power. Now, this is a really difficult system to balance with democracy because what ends up happening is that the people who have the most money end up winning, but the people who have the most money's interest is directly opposed to the majority's interests. Now, these capital owners aren't stupid. Within the capitalist class, there's a concept called the riot tax. That's this equation they do to determine the maximum amount that they can starve you, underpay you, unhouse you before you start rebelling. Every time people start getting inclined to violence, they ease up on how much they're wringing out of you. To many people, that sounds like progress. But crucially, the capitalists still hold all the power, which means anytime they want, they can yank that progress back from you and you can't do shit.
What do you consider a long book? 300 pages? 400 pages? 500 pages? 600 pages? 700 pages?
Rhythm and blues was a hot sound that all the kids were listening to in the 1950s, and when white listeners started consuming it, music execs saw a way to capitalize off of it. This new sound listened to by white kids was dubbed rock and roll, and label owners started seeking out white performers to cover black songs because at the time, radio and TV were still mainly segregated. This paved the way for musicians like Elvis Presley to build careers off of other people's songs and rise to the top of the charts. With Elvis Presley's success, white producers and performers stopped covering R&B songs in a pop style and just straight up started imitating them. After all, this is where the new sound was headed. But while Elvis Presley brought rock and roll to the white masses and certainly helped popularize it, the genre also became whitewashed. You see, African American artists at the time faced huge obstacles in getting on mainstream radio, securing record deals, or even being awarded royalties and credit. It's how Pat Boone was able to cover Little Richard songs, basically pass them off as his own, and get success like Little Richard had never seen. So through time, white musicians became the faces of rock and roll. But I'd be remiss not to mention that the original wave of black rock and roll artists led to some of the greats we know today. While the music industry tends to pigeonhole black artists into black categories, musicians like Jimi Hendrix, Sly Stone, and Prince carved out their own way and refused to succumb to industry pressures. All in all, rock and roll has always incorporated a hybrid of styles, and it would be a mistake to claim that black people have no place in the rock world because after all, they invented it.
I saw a video about how autism makes it harder to drive, and oh my god, this is like a pet peeve of mine. Like, before I even had an autism diagnosis, like, which was just last year, I've always told people, like, no, I can't drive, I won't drive, I refuse to drive, it would be really dangerous, and like, I list all of these reasons, which are very autistic reasons now that I know, but, you know, back then I had no idea, but like, super autistic reasons, and then always people are like, oh well, but you'll learn, oh well, but this, oh well, but this. I say, I have no depth perception, I have no idea how far away a car is from me, and they'll say, yeah, you'll just learn as you do it, and I'm like, that sounds dangerous. Why are you trying to push me to do something dangerous? Also, I just have no, like, I don't want to. It's not like I need to be convinced or I need someone to, like, tell me how it gets better. Like, I have no, you know, desire to drive anyway, so why does it matter?